right, everyone. Welcome to the Now's first webinar slash podcast slash we will see what this turns into. I don't think we really need to introduce ourselves right off the bat because this is going to be a weekly thing and our listeners will get to know us as we continue to process what we're talking about. What we're going to do for today is try and get as much information we can on certain questions. This is going to be a weekly thing. So what I'd like to start off with is the question of what does communication look like in 2025? And I guess with that question, you need to ask ourselves, what is communication? And communication, for what my research suggested, is the process of sharing information and ideas between people. And I guess what I want to open this right up to with you lot is that happening at all in 2025? I know that's a big general statement. Or with the rise of social media, is communication now just a repetition of ideas and we're just screaming into an echo chamber of what we want to hear back of certain individuals or certain ideas, or dare I say even AIs making these conversations up? And is the repetition actual genuine communication? Anyways, anyone want to jump in right off the bat?
I mean, I'm happy to just jump in and what when you said that, Duncan, what I immediately thought of was this whole notion that we live in a post-truth era. So there's no actual absolute truths anymore, and people talk about my truth, and as you said, the lens of whatever political narrative, whether it be far right, far left, whatever, or even not even political, just like stuff that's regurgitated. For me, as someone who was born in 1975 and lived a big portion of my life without digital, I think one of the problems that we're seeing is because of the digital layer, there is an absence of human communication. So you said communication about sharing ideas, but I would argue it's almost the vessel with which you use to communicate those ideas. So for example, the difference between live theatre and a film, live theatre will always be more visceral because of its nature, or meeting someone in person will always be more powerful because of the cues you're giving off with your body and your body language and the tonality and just the height that you might be in real life or whatever, or the volume of your voice or the physicality of that. And I think with the digital layer, people just communicating via email, you can kind of hide behind that, and it can take, not always, but can take a layer of authenticity out of it. But also this idea of engaging, what is, you've asked, the thing about what does communication look like? I would almost say also, what does engagement look like? Does it really engage someone if you're just responding to an email? And I think that's the challenge. And something I read, which I thought was very interesting, was from a thing about the Climate Change Agency, said that actually the struggle now is this thing about authenticity and overcoming physical and emotional barriers. And one of the things they've suggested is hyper-personalization through technology. I don't agree with that at all, but it's an interesting point of view.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I really believe we're in an exciting time of the world, but also where communication is in a bit of a crisis state. Like in England, especially in October 2024, the government have started a new campaign called We Need to Talk, which is all about starting to introduce oracy into schools because they're realizing we're just not learning or teaching children from a young age how to speak again because everything's digitalized. And I think for me, oracy and communication is similar to what you were both saying, is this idea of I need to express and I need to learn. And one of the concerns for me is people, aren't able to express how they need to express because we don't live in a very present time in life. We go off of like dopamine hits on social media and everything is this instant gratification, which I think really numbs us from understanding what we need in a conversation from someone else. And also we live in an era where, because everything is so readily available, it's like we don't have the patience to do that engagement, like you were saying, David. It's like we're not used to the idea that I can learn from sitting down with someone and asking questions and being open and being curious. Way more that's going to be way more satisfying than actually having a look on ChatGPT and asking a question and getting that instant hit straight away. There's something about engaging with someone in a conversational manner that's more personal, be more satisfying, and see just a much deeper understanding than an answer you might get off of AI. And I worry that that's where so many people are going to be going over the next 10 years, because there's so much stress on optimization of productivity rather than actually let's bring it back to the basics, for me, I think.
And another question I kind of want to pose, Brittany, I want to hear your thoughts as well. But with going off of that, Molly, is communication now going to turn into something of a luxury? Luxury of class, luxury of age, of, well, back when I was a kid, then we could have like tea time. And when we have tea time, we could, gossip, and that's a form of communication. But is this going to turn into something of, now with everyone having devices and phones, is Chat GPT going to be the new complete all-around source, or has now kind of gabbing turned into, which was once fun, turned into now a luxury event? You're having tea time, that's a luxury event. You have time to pass, that's a luxury event. Yeah. Brittany, I want to hear your thoughts about that, actually.
Well, all I was going to say was kind of circling back to your initial question of also just what is communication, of what is it looking like right now. We've kind of got really into the details of just how we're communicating today, or where it's kind of traveling to. But if I really want to kind of simplify it and boil it down, when I think of communication, that exchange of thought, that exchange of idea, that exchange of information, and I think what I find the most fascinating, what's actually taking place, is that it's the lack of the exchange. What's happening now is it's just that there's one side of it that's taking place. So there's the side that I'm giving, so that I'm reviewing the Instagram post that I'm about to post 100 times before I post it. I'm rereading. This morning I reread an email 3 times before I decided to send it. So those ways of how I communicate constantly, I'm rewriting, I'm rethinking over a text before I send it to someone. That's the first step of communication. So I'm spending so much time and effort on the first step of, how am I coming across? Am I being clear in my information? And then I'm sending it. But what I'm missing is the other side of the exchange of, I'm not then in that moment, because we are kind of talking about this digital time. I'm not there to witness the other person receive that text, to witness the other person reading that email. So therefore, the amount of information that's being communicated back to me, even if I'm getting a text back, I'm getting an email back, I'm getting a like, I'm getting a comment on the post, that you could argue is still a part of that exchange. So that's a part of that communication. But because the initial moment of that I'm not present for, it's putting another step in the kind of cycle. It's putting something else that's somewhat filtering, to a degree, what that next response is from someone. And then so I think of it as the giving of the information, then receiving of the information, and then the feedback from that. So the feedback from receiving that information. And so what now is happening with the involvement of technology is just these other steps are taking place in between. Or I should say that's different than when it's face-to-face communication, or even different than this of us. I can still see all your faces right now. And so to a degree, I'm still getting information back. So that exchange is taking place, as opposed to, as you were mentioning earlier, Duncan, about kind of screaming into a void, or information just kind of going out. That's a one-way traffic. And I think what's really intriguing about what's happening right now is we're missing a lot of the flip side, or the flip side of it is being altered ever so slightly, because there's another step of engagement that's taking place. There's something interjecting.
Do you think that's in a relationship to kind of a narcissistic culture that we're slowly turning into? Because I mean, don't get me wrong, we've all, I think we've done this, where we've looked at our email, looked at our post, make sure, but that's a bit narcissistic, isn't it? So we're all worried about the transferring of energy, but the receiving of it, when you actually have to stop and listen, is kind of becoming a lost art. And we're so focused on, again, not to focus on social media, but we're posting pictures of ourselves sometimes, like I'm not sure what the stats are, but you're doing selfies, right? If you're maybe of a different generation, and it's very me, look at me. And then when you're writing your captions, it's again me, look at me. So you're throwing it out there, but the receiving aspect is what's missing. Is that what you're on about?
Well, it's not that it's missing, it's just that it's different. It's just that it's different than when it's a face-to-face conversation, or like you were saying, like sitting around having tea and hearing the response from someone and being able to sit there and see them have to receive that information live and what that response is. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily missing. I think it's just existing in a different way now. It's existing with another step in between. It's allowing the time to be able to, I can have my first instinct off of an email from someone that maybe has upset me. I can have that grievance in my body, and I can deal with it before I respond, as opposed to me practicing sitting across the room from that person. They say the exact same thing to me, and I'm dealing with that grievance in my body in front of them. And that's just two, it's just two different ways of communicating.
I think Duncan, your point about socioeconomic mobility is brilliantly made as well, because it's almost like we come full circle. So like in the 50s when people developed TV, it was all about broadcast, and then we went into mid 90s, it was all interactive, and all the training was interactive. And without doing a plug for the Now, I think that's what's good about what we do, is it's very interactive. And then we've come full circle again, where like you're saying, it's like everyone's a broadcaster. It's like being very careful. I mean, certainly in a corporate setting, pressing the pressing the enter key on an email can be like firing a gun. So one needs to be fairly careful, and we've all done that. We've all made mistakes with that. But I see what you're saying. This whole thing about, because it's so inward gazing and slightly narcissistic, it's almost like you're on your own. Weirdly, you could. And to Brittany's point, there's that huge delay in the response, whereas in a conversation, so you could say the art of conversation is something that needs to be rediscovered, because one of the things about a live conversation is someone might disagree with you, or you might make somebody angry, or there might be a confrontational thing that goes on, which is not bad. It's quite human. So I think your points are brilliantly made. It's all kind of weaving together to what is the art we need to rediscover this thing. Maybe it is, like you said, people who've got the time to sit and chit chat, but everybody's so busy whizzing around and earning money and being digital and busy, that they don't take that time to go, I'm going to sit and have a cup of coffee without my phone, and I'm going to have a chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's also something in like, I think there is somewhat, going back to your question, Duncan, about this idea of luxury. There's a type of privilege in having space to be wrong, and I think that's something that it's easy to feel like we have to get everything right, because we live in a time where research is so readily available to us. You can learn something just by clicking on an app and have like 20 hundreds of different like opinions, and everyone's saying opposing stuff, and there's very little even actual verification of half of the information out there, which I think really stops people from feeling brave enough to ask questions in person, and feeling brave enough to maybe get stuff wrong in person, which perhaps fills and encourages this type of like, I'm just going to do this monologue of what I know and my lived experience, and hopefully that's hopeful to someone else. But as soon as someone cuts into that, then I'm going to feel threatened, and that's why I don't open up that conversation to people. Perhaps it's almost like, well, if there's so much information readily available and it feels so overwhelming because it's not being verified, even though half of it, which I read as a voice and accent coach, is absolute nonsense, it kind of fuels this culture of you must be loud about what you know, and you must sound so strong in everything that you do, otherwise you're not trustworthy. Almost, it tends to feel like on social media in this age, the loudest people in the space are the people that are somehow more trustworthy than people who are really being more considered and actually going through what they can do. Yeah.
It sounds, a common theme that I'm hearing so far in this conversation is speed and how fast things have gotten, instead of doing the opposite, which might be the best course of action, is to take a second, receive things properly, receive the information before, like we're so go always with everything. Everything is so go. Even the queue in the shop, there's the machines now because the person isn't fast enough. We're always going faster and faster. But maybe I'm a man of opposition, so maybe we need to do the opposite to have a bit more clear communication, is taking the breath, taking the second, having the information, having a proper think, and then giving back. So you have that transferring of communication as clearly as possible.
100%. So for anyone who might be listening or watching this and don't know what we all do, I work as a voice and accent coach, and there's a fantastic voice coach who I admire very deeply and absolutely love, called Barbara Hausman. And one of the best things she's told me is it's so radical in today's age to be slow, and because it's just so different, and we just don't do it. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Having a conversation in a healthy way means to be as present as possible, which means you have to slow down. And the funny thing is, it feels slow. It's not even slow, like the time it takes for me to process something is always going to feel so much longer in my head than it actually is. It's the same with Duncan and Brittany and David. We all work in the acting world as well. When you're on stage and you forget a line, you think, it's been 10 minutes and it's probably been like half a minute. It's that pressure of having to be quick, and actually it's so radical to be slow. Yeah.
I think it does come down to this thing about privilege, and I consider myself to be somebody who, I would say I come from quite a privileged background. I went to a public school and all of that. So what I did today was hand wrote some letters to some agents, because I'm trying to get some more work for my advocate business. So to agencies. And I thought about it, and one letter took a good 10 minutes to write, because I'm handwriting and you can't make any mistakes. But there's a certain level of privilege, and I've got time to do that, but also that I know how to do that. I remember years ago when I was at Havas, one of my sales guys, I was writing letters to clients, had 100 letters to write to all the sponsors. And he went, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm writing a letter." He said, "What? You're going freestyle?" I'm like, "I'm just writing a letter." And to him, it was totally countercultural. He would have rehearsed it, which is not a criticism. Again, it's this thing about people's training and how much time they have, and maybe how much privilege they have. If you went to a school where you were encouraged to write with a fountain pen, then that's all well and good. For a lot of people, that they've never even seen a fountain pen. So I think, and again, without judgment, I think it's important to bring maybe to Duncan's point, to bring some of those skills back and allow people to take their time and give them the privilege and the space to go, we're going to learn how to write a letter today. And it's okay to make a mistake. And if you do, you might have to scrub it out or start again, or anyway. Yeah.
Because when you focus, for those who are solely listening, I'm about to hold up a typewriter because I do a bit of writing myself. And when you do different types of writing on different materials, it forces you to write differently. Because I write on a notepad, I write on my laptop, and I write on my typewriter. And every source that I write on, a different part of me comes out, because again, when you're just writing on your phone, they get it out, and then the thought can go quickly. So with a bit more things that I want to get out fast, top of my head stuff, I write on my phone, on my laptop. And then when I'm forced to sit down with an idea and forced to have a cup of tea and with my usually screenplays, to be honest, I write on my typewriter, because you can't make a mistake, because it's really hard to get the white out and takes the process, right? So yeah, again, slowing it down, I think is a fascinating observation that we've made in this conversation. Britt, you look like you're itching to say something.
I sure am. I was waiting to see how long it was going to take for me to say the sentence, but here we are. I'm a new mom. So I'm a new mom. I know. I thought maybe we could get through a whole call without it, but here we are. But no, I'm a new mom and have a 7.5-month-old. And what I find very fascinating, as someone who is a go person, works constantly, still makes a ton of time for friends, is scheduled literally every minute of my life, and multitask. I'm literally the epitome of have many things going on at once and move at a quick pace. That now having a kid and being on mat leave where my life has changed drastically, I now am forced to slow down. I'm forced to move at a completely different pace. I've done a complete 180 of what my pace was a year ago to where I am now. And what I find very fascinating, just thinking about what we're talking about right now, is how attentive I am to my child, at how quickly now I know all of his cues. And from when he was a really, really young kid, um, even like still in the newborn phase, could already tell immediately of what the difference was between his cries of I'm hungry versus I'm tired versus I'm uncomfortable. And I think that obviously that comes from being able to spend so much time with him. But I think also it's because of that ability to slow down and focus my attention, my ability to pick up on those cues that he is communicating to me in the way that he knows how to communicate, I'm suddenly way more attentive to that because I'm moving at such a slower pace. And I think that, obviously had I kept buzzing around, that it would have taken me longer, obviously, to have noticed all of those slight differences. And it just makes me think about how there's so many people in my life, I'm about to go back to work, and thinking about even before I was a mom, of how quickly I was going through life, going through those relationships, whether that be professional relationships or personal relationships, that so many of those moments of interaction were so fast for the sake of to be able to get to the next one, or because I only have this amount of time to do this, that how many of those cues was I missing? How many of those cues was I not allowing myself to be able to actually be really attentive to, just simply because of speed and capacity and awareness? And so just this kind of connection to time and communication, and what the different circumstances, how different circumstances can allow us to be able to create those more in-depth relationships. I mean, it's like when you start dating someone new, you give them so much attention, therefore you can learn so many things about them. And so yeah, just an interesting correlation between time and being able to pick up on these things as a means of getting to know another human being as well.
And sorry, I'm going to jump in really quick because I know Molly has something to say too. But that's arguably, ooh, this is a big. Maybe this is a bit too general, but that's arguably then not even living. If you're going that quickly through things, again, arguably, are you receiving enough to actually experience something? Or are you so focused on the next thing before it's even been in the moment that you're just passing through life? And then the day is already gone. And then you're already living for next week rather than being in the moment, receiving it, letting the breath hit you, letting the things pass you. It's like even watching a film. If you have, I know this is very common now, but films are on in the background as white noise, and films that even me as a huge film goer, I'm like, that didn't affect me as much as it used to. Why didn't it affect me as much as it used to? Was a film I know would make me cry or would move me in a way? Because I'm not listening. I'm not actually listening to the film. It's just there. It's in there, kind of in the background. But if you actually pay attention, if you actually give it the respect that these writers and these actors and these creators have done, and you're receiving it properly, then you're with the film. Again, film as an example, but this could be towards anything in life. So maybe that's the key to life. Well, we got through the answer of life really quickly in 30 minutes. But yeah, no, just slowing it down, actually receiving it. So then maybe your life is a bit more full because you don't want to skip through life. You don't want to wake up at 80 and be like, oh my God, I'm 80. No, you want to be like, oh my God, I'm 80. Like finally, you want to you like go through it a little bit, go through the mud, because it's just it's a bit more of a full life, I reckon.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're both saying. And I think there was a time in my life where I thought being slow is unproductive or being slow is easy. And actually, it's one of the hardest things we can possibly do. And what I've found on my journey is actually just practicing slowness, stillness once a week in one time frame actually makes a huge difference across the rest of the week. And it feels like when we're talking about these ideas, and I think we're all quite like big thinkers as coaches in what we do. We try to see the bigger picture. It feels like, oh gosh, I have to change my whole lifestyle. And actually, I don't think it is that. I think it's finding 10 minutes of meditation or 10 minutes of stillness or 10 minutes of saying, when I go into this room today and have this meeting, I really want to think about this idea of getting my breath in and taking pause and taking my time and just noticing that feeling in yourself of wanting to jump in and wanting to, tell the person in front of me that, oh yeah, I saw that. I knew that. You don't have to tell me that. And please, that validation that we often seek from people is what I think tends to rush us. And something, again, I got from Barbara Hausman, who I mentioned earlier, about this idea of slowness is the backward circle versus the forward circle. We're always constantly, our nervous system, breath, everything is here. And actually, literally, physically gesturing backwards and gesturing into the body and causing us to slow down is really helpful. And all of that, all of these practices in voice anyway originate from Eastern practices, which, David, I know you speak about a lot as well, but it all comes from yogic practices who their way of life is just so much more encompassing of this stuff rather than the world we live in here, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very much about the left and the right brain. Without going into it, one of the things, there's an amazing book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which is all about the non-language part and that actually real communication visually. And I find when I'm drawing it, it's very meditative. There's nothing quite like it, and I find I get depressed if I don't draw, which is really interesting. But just to your point about slowing down, one of the exercises I used to do with agency teams before we got into PowerPoint and how to present is I'd write, right, we're all going for a walk. I'm like, what's he doing now? And we'd all go for a walk. And I wouldn't brief them, I wouldn't tell them anything. And they were like, I wonder if there's like signs he's put up. And I just walk around the block and then sit them back down again and go. And I would deliberately walk quite slowly, and you could see them going, come on, hurry up. And I just sat them down after and said, what did you see? And it was fascinating, just slowing the pace of the walk. And they weren't allowed their phones, and slowing the pace of walking down, you start to notice a lot more, beautiful thing, really, even in London, stunning, beautiful, just the color of the sky and the pavement and all of that stuff. So I think to the point you've all made, but Duncan, you said it really beautifully. If we slow down, does that mean our experience of life is necessarily deeper? So we actually get to see and sit and look at a sunrise or a sunset, or really enjoy a cup of coffee without listening to one's Walkman or watching one's Instagram. Just enjoy the coffee. So that idea of simplicity, and it is an Eastern thing, and it's becoming a lot more popular here, this idea that you can actually rest in movement as well. It's one of the things I spoke to that guy Giles we spoke to when he was talking about playing the piano. I said, think one of the things you probably need to do, especially if you're doing something like Rachmaninoff, is find the stillness while you're smashing away at the keyboard. And he immediately said, yes, I need to center. So yeah, this is a huge subject.
Besides dating yourself with the Walkman comment, David, I think you did a really good, a lovely job with that. Okay, so part of this being our weekly webinar / podcast, just for getting our listeners used to it, what we're trying to do is, every week we'll be we'll be talking about different topics about communication. But what we're trying to do is have it within a window within 30 to 45 minutes. So we are just now on the cusp of our 30-minute conversation. Do we want to keep going? Again, being this our first episode, or do we want to cap it here? I'll leave it to the floor.
I had one little comment to make, actually, which I thought was really interesting. And it was to Molly's point about we have to be right all the time. And there's that pressure to be right. One of the things, so as the old man of the group, one of the things I've noticed as I head towards 50 is I'm quite happy. I think Brittany said 3 or 4 things in our acting class the other day, which I had no idea what she was talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm literally the first person. When I was in my 20s, I'd be like, I'm not saying anything. But now I'm literally like, I really want to know. And I don't care if I don't know, because there's a load of young stuff I have no idea. If someone said, "Oh, if you heard that person," no, what the hell are you talking about? So as I get slightly older, my cultural references are starting to get a little bit frayed. But again, this idea of you don't need to be right, and there's nothing wrong in not knowing. And actually, there's something quite charming about asking, and actually quite to the point about building advocacy and relationship with people. There's something really nice about going, could you tell me more about that? Because I don't know anything about it. And then they do, and then it opens them up. So I think the point about there's a power in stillness, but there's also a power in being still and resting with not knowing and asking and going, can you tell me more about Meisner? Because I've never heard of him, for example.
I think it's also really fascinating that, we started this conversation with just talking about what does communication look like today. And obviously we're speaking about it from our particular lenses and our particular perspectives, which it's making it very obvious about how it's connected to societal pressures just as much as it's connected to the culture that we live in, just as much as it's connected to how we were brought up. Molly, you speaking about the kind of pacing of life. I remember the feeling of a Saturday morning watching cartoons when I was like a child. And then as soon as my parents got home from their coffees, I would jump up and get to my chore list, as if like me sitting down and watching cartoons and like taking my restful Saturday, when I was the kid that was in every single after school program and had been going all week, as if that was a bad thing for me to be sitting and watching an hour or two of television. And I didn't have phone, tablet, none of these things. That was my like only screen time of the week, but like as if that was a negative thing, that I wasn't working, I wasn't doing something productive. So I think this connection that we have to where we live in the world, who we're surrounded by, therefore what those pressures are, how that has created a particular metronome inside of us, how it's created a metronome for our life and the pacing at which we need to move at, as if there is a goal that is related to that, of success and failure, this need to either to constantly succeed, or that it's even considered success, and this kind of validation, searching for validation, all of these things. It's just, it's just proving so much that there's so many contributing factors to what it is that we're looking into. And we didn't even really get into like individual personal kind of boundaries or particular, Molly kind of touched on this at the beginning, but of just, what might be going on for an individual that's blocking them from a particular type of communication or connecting to another person, another human being, where that kind of comes from. We didn't even get into that. We were kind of really more focused on these kind of external, but there's also a ton of there can be a ton of internal barriers as well. So anyways, it's just making me think about how there isn't a simple definition. There isn't a simple answer to this. It's not a question to be answered. I think it's something to reflect on. And if we were to have this conversation 10 years ago and in 10 years from now, that this would be completely different.
Mm.
The now. Being in the now.
Being in the now, exactly.
Well, lovely. Does anyone have any other closing remarks that they'd like to bring up? Okay, lovely. In that case, we will see you all next week. And everyone who's listening, thank you very much for listening.